Hello, everybody, and welcome to the inaugural Listen Outside Game On podcast, where enthusiastic amateurs talk amateurishly and enthusiastically about the World Cup. With me, I'm Ellie, by the way. Hi, and with me I've got Chris.
Hello.
Lucy.
Hi.
And Stuart.
Hello.
You may be wondering what our credentials are to be so authoritative about football and about the World Cup. Well, basically, we've not really got any credentials. We are here to talk to you person to person about the World Cup, convince you why you, who are not necessarily interested in the World Cup, ought to get excited about it, and generally provide, social commentary, memes, and general messing about in a sort of a loose football theme. But I think some of us do actually have some football fan credentials. Chris?
I will say that my credentials are I have won several titles on Football Manager games over the last 20 whatever years of my life. But I've been to see Manchester United play since I was about 5 or 6 years old, been to about 30 games. They are my team. And I'm that rare breed of Manchester United fan who is from Manchester. So for the football fans out of there who do know that is quite a rare thing. Yes, that's my credentials.
Astonishing. How was it in the 90s to be a Manchester United fan in Manchester? Or are you not old enough to have been a Manchester United fan in Manchester in the 90s?
I was just about. I was there. I remember watching the treble. I actually didn't watch the match where Manchester United won the treble, where they won the Champions League for the first time in 30-something years, because I decided after 10 minutes to go play my Nintendo 64. So I wasn't the most dedicated football fan, as you can tell, but it was amazing. I remember watching them get the trophies, all of that. It was, probably the best time to be a Manchester United fan, especially over the last few years. So, it was pretty spectacular.
And who are you rooting for in the World Cup this summer?
Oh, see, I love the underdogs. As much as being a Manchester United fan doesn't lend you to that. So I think just because they are amazing and I love the thunderclap, it has to be Iceland. I really want Iceland to surprise everyone, make it quite deep in. I think that they have a chance of making it into the knockout stages, certainly, and then we'll see where it goes from there. But yeah, I'm all for an Icelandic bit of success.
This is where I should have the soundboard prepared and be able to press a button and have it go, huh! Okay, Lucy, your history with football.
Okay, I have been a diehard Aston Villa fan, unfortunately, since I was a child. Since I was 4, we go into Villa Park, watch games. We're not so good these days. We're not in the Premier League anymore. But I still go. I go now, more now probably than I ever did in the Premier League. So I drag my other half along, who is not into football, but he's good sport. And I've always made terrible bets on it. I'm not good at predicting who's going to win. I'm not going to lie. But I think my greatest achievement in my work sweepstakes last time, we did the guessing the scores and getting points for each thing. I beat an entire office of about 200 people. So I don't know. I'm all right. I don't know. I'm obsessed with football though. I've always loved it. And yeah.
Excellent. And who are you looking forward to seeing in the World Cup?
Well, usually my backup team is Belgium, but they're in the same group as England. And one of my best mates is Belgian. So we have a bit of a rivalry. We've agreed, me and my mate, to mutually support Egypt because Mo Salah's a babe. So good reason, of course. But yeah, we've agreed to mutually support Egypt. So I'm looking forward to watching their first game tomorrow.
Awesome. Stuart, your football supporting credentials.
Okay, well, I was listening to Chris talking about gaming, and I realised that essentially, if we're talking about Nintendo 64 games, we're talking about Star Fox. I'm probably the slippy toad of this particular podcast, I think. Star Fox fans will know what I mean. But my football supporting credentials, well, like Chris, I've won a few titles on Football Manager, the most recent one being the Championship with Shrewsbury Town. I'm going up to the Premier League next season. But I'm from Shrewsbury, so I've been to a few Shrewsbury Town games. I've been to a few Telford United games as well. But my dad was an Everton fan, and I have always supported Liverpool, which irritated him greatly. But I think these are good times right now for Liverpool fans. I really enjoy the fact that Jurgen Klopp is there and he's got them playing high energy football, and of course they got to the Champions League final, which was a massive disappointment. But I mean, perhaps it's all these years of also watching Eurovision, but I look at something like the Champions League final and I think at least they got there. So many teams didn't. You know, it's best to get there and fail than to not get there at all. By the way, watching that last World Cup game, which I know we'll come on to later, I fancied a game on the Nintendo 64 as well during most of that. So, Chris, you're not alone.
And who are you getting behind in the World Cup, Stuart?
Well, I live in Estonia. I live in Tallinn. So I tend to get behind the nearest Nordic team. So I guess that would either be Sweden, who look kind of boring, or Denmark, who have Christian Eriksen, who is an epic player. So I'll probably get behind Denmark.
Okay, and I'm sort of making an assumption here, being that you three will be having England as a sort of a first team.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Stuart's pulling a face.
I think it's okay to do that now, but it's just that I went through so many years when it was not cool to support England, mostly because the papers were throwing shade at them. So I think it's good to get back to a stage where we can actually support England properly now.
It is very much like Eurovision.
Oh yeah.
Well, I am now Scottish, so supporting England is not really a thing that I can be doing. So I'm getting behind Iceland and Nigeria, who are unfortunately in the same group.
I went to Nigeria last week at Wembley. It was an amazing match. Nigerian fans are epic in capital letters. Like, I was talking to some of them afterwards because the queue between Wembley and the tube station is horrific. They were just talking to me afterwards. They were like, I was just like, what were you chanting? Because it was like a non-stop party the entire match in the Nigerian crowd. They're like, yeah, we just sing Christian songs sometimes and cheer on the players. I was like, what a time to be alive. That is great. They are, honestly, they sold out all of their bit and a lot of the England bit in Wembley, and it was just amazing.
Awesome.
They're amazing.
Well, I suppose we should get onto my football history as well. I'm originally from Barnsley, and I am a former season ticket holder at Oakwell. During the sort of, I'm going to call them the post-glory years, after the brief and ill-fated spell in the Premiership, I saw Barnsley head down the divisions. I've been to Wembley with Barnsley twice. Won one, lost one, and Barnsley just got relegated again. But I am an absolute sucker for a big tournament. I love a big tournament. So on the music site that I do listen outside, I do themed recommendations around the world. I did it around the Euros last time, and I'm now doing it for the World Cup. So it's an unusual band or musical artist from the country that's playing, and you can have a little bit of a vote. It shows you a sort of a different side of the country from what you might expect. For Russia and Saudi Arabia this afternoon, I had two all-female bands. I had some anti-establishment punks from Russia called Stress Hold, and an all-female sort of soft rock band from Jeddah called The Accolade, who, like, it's not cutting edge, but I'm just happy that they're doing it. So, the World Cup, the big one, what we're all here for. Why should people be excited about the World Cup? Isn't it just more football?
I mean, it's more football, but it's that unifying force of football, and it brings it all together. And there's just that kind of, you see different styles of football, you see different people that you would week in, week out. And there's always those little individual stories. If you want to pick out sort of one country that you can follow, it's the same with the club, but you're now surrounded by an entire country that is usually, or hopefully, all the way behind that particular team. And even then, you've got the individual stories within that. Each team, you will be able to find like one or two players, even if you want, who you can follow, and then you'll find that particular thing that's driving them, that's making that story for them. And I think that just because it's on such a global scale, it just makes it something so much more special, because you end up with, like, if you just look at the Premier League, you end up with like, oh, United versus Liverpool, and there's a lot of aggression, and sometimes the World Cup can bring that together, and that has that competitive nature, but then it's still something that's celebrating. It's more joyful, I think. You certainly do get the aggression every now and again, but I think there's just a sense of joy with the World Cup that you get with things like Eurovision as well. So it's that kind of lovely tale, and there's a tapestry that you can follow through it, more so than a 9-month-long season of football where you have to be dedicated that entire way through if you really want to get to that nitty-gritty.
Yeah, the World Cup is a sort of high-quality mini-series.
Mm.
And let's go and explore these Eurovision parallels. Because for me, it's another thing where if you're doing it right, you can sort of experience the nice bits of national pride and that sort of sense of belonging to a community. And it can also be used by the hosts to push a little bit of soft politics, a little bit of them wanting to show you what they think of their country. Anybody want to come in on that?
Yeah, I think that the World Cup and Eurovision are both places where countries can put aspects of their culture in the shop window that would not normally get there. By which I mean, for example, I think it was Lucy mentioned Nigeria. Now, Nigeria is a country that I certainly don't know much about. I know it's the most populous country in Africa. I know they have a big film industry, and I know that there are many Christians and Muslims there. That's about all I know.
But, and they brew their own Guinness there.
But they get to put this really fun cultural aspect in, which maybe is obvious to them and is obvious to people living in that geopolitical area, but which people in Western Europe maybe don't know about. And I think that's really cool, and that's something that also happens with Eurovision. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Lucy.
Hello.
Have you got a Eurovision World Cup?
I think, again, following from Stuart's point about Nigeria as well, and this is going to sound really silly, but even like on a fashion point of view, it's been big news that Nigeria's shirt has sold out 3 million copies in one day, because it's very African. You can tell it's an African country. It's immense. Like, it's really cool. And I know that's a really, really minute part of it, but it's a big news story that happened, and maybe in certain countries that kind of finance coming in can be really useful. On terms of hosting it, I don't think the opening ceremony today was particularly Russian, having Robbie Williams there, who is of course English. I think they could have done a lot more. You know, I think while I was saying it, me and my friend were watching. We were like, where the hell is Cirque du Soleil, like, actually running this show? They should have really focused on that, like they did in 2009 with Eurovision when they opened the show. I think they did a really great job of it in 2009. I think it was very Russian and trying to show a modern Russia. Of course, there were controversies there, but that's a whole other issue. But I think today I think they could have done better in the opening ceremony, showing their own culture. I know there was that absolutely stunning opera singer with Robbie, and I think that was done really well. But yeah, I think usually it can be shown. I think, of course, England lost the bid to host this World Cup, and I think they would have really gone to town on making it very, very British, like they did with the Olympics.
Bowler hats as far as you can see.
So yes, like literally, and they would have made it very silly and wonderful.
Shall we talk for a bit for people who've not been keeping up with the sort of ongoing long-term soap storylines in world football about the circumstances in which Russia were able to host the World Cup?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think John Oliver on Last Week Tonight covered this pretty well. Essentially, FIFA is what he calls cartoonishly evil. Even though the top brass of FIFA, which is the governing body of football, have pretty much all resigned in the last couple of years, the new lot aren't any better. It's a breath of fresh air that smells a lot like the old breath. And essentially, the country that gets the World Cup these days is the country that can bribe the most money and claim it will build stadia in time, which it then doesn't. People might know that Qatar is getting it in 2022, and they promised a lot of things in their bid program, which they have turned out to not be able to come up with. So that's where we are, I think, in terms of the transparency of the bidding process. And we've just had another bidding process where the USA, Canada, and Mexico's joint bid has beaten Morocco in quite dodgy circumstances.
Yeah, and this is for a contest that's going to be held in 2026. Unlike Eurovision, people get a long time in their run up to their World Cup because they kind of have to put on more stuff over a wider geographical area, and there's usually some actual building of stadia that goes on as well. So that's why it's decided so far in advance. I mean, we have no idea what the geopolitical situation is going to be like in America or Morocco in 2026. We don't really know what it's going to be like in 2020.
I just want to say, I was in Morocco 2 weeks ago, and they have built Marrakesh airport is right. You can still smell the fresh paint. It's covered with 2026 bid stuff everywhere. I think they started building stadiums in Marrakesh, and they didn't win the bid. So
that's
literally, when I saw they didn't win the bid, I was like, oh no! Like they really thought they were going to get it, like genuinely.
Oh, that's quite upsetting for them. Oh dear.
It was rough, kind of, when I saw it. I was like, oh no, they thought they had it. And I kind of think they should have got it because there's only been one World Cup in Africa before. I don't know.
Yeah, Chris.
I did see one thing about it, though, that Morocco have attempted to bid for it something like 5 times before, and it kind of has that feeling, ironically, of Azerbaijan, who keep on bidding for things over and over again and keep on being knocked back, and it's almost that little bit of a, maybe you should take the hint a little bit that you need to have like a base before you start actually bidding for things. I think there was something like they needed to build 9 of the 12 stadiums, and fair enough, they're building them now, but there would always be that doubt, I think, and that's probably why people went for America and Canada and Mexico, which is the weirdest kind of situation of pairing 3 countries together.
Can we even guarantee that those 3 countries will have diplomatic relations with one another in 2026?
Especially America and Mexico. We know that there is a lot of tension, obviously, with the wall and this and that, and Trudeau and Trump don't get along. There's so much. I mean, it is the long-running thing that, I think FIFA have a lot to answer for, and I think that money is a big thing. With FIFA, there's something about they're going to make a $12 billion profit from having it in America and Mexico and Canada, and I think that speaks for it all, because obviously that gets shared within reason amongst FIFA. So I think that, I just think that there's obviously not a perfect solution for this, because there's always going to be, unfortunately, a level of corruption in these things. But I think there should be an overseeing panel outside of FIFA, rather than just having be the elite few, like 200 this time, have it go to a wider process or an independent process. Just something else, I think, needs to be done there.
Yeah. Going back to something that you said, Lucy, about those Nigerian football shirts, and you were sort of playing down the fact that fashion and style has got anything to do with the World Cup. I would argue that that's not quite right because football is now a multimedia, multi channel money making opportunity. The things that the footballers wear on and off the pitch, that is basically going to be your men's style guide for the next year, for better or for worse.
I mean, like hairstyles and everything.
Yeah.
Like the ruddy man bun. I'm pretty sure that whole thing really went to town once football players like going for it. Well and truly, hashtag fail. But I think like a lot of things like that, like literally, it goes down the like the boots. I mean, I have a 6-year-old nephew, and he's adamant that he had a certain pair of Nike boots or some brand boots because Jamie Vardy, off of Leicester City in England, has it in. I'm in Leicester. He wants everything Leicester City. So it's kind of, it does definitely go down. It's not just adults either. Like kids hear about these things too, which is good and bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The footballers.
I think at the very top of the game of football, there is this real cult of the individual these days. I mean, obviously you've had Messi and Ronaldo at the top for such a long time that really nobody can remember a time when they weren't at the top. But I mean, the point is that them and Neymar and those really really top players, they have this kind of. They need to be prominent on Instagram all the time. They need to be posting on social media all the time. This is the kind of attention that we didn't have maybe 20 or 30 years ago on footballers. And I think that's another Eurovision parallel because, when contestants go to Eurovision, they are in the spotlight all the time. They have to be diplomats for their country. And, again, what they're wearing, whether their shirt is buttoned up or whatever, that will be, whether they have a man bun or not, that will be in the papers the next day. That'll be on Twitter the next day, on Listen Outside maybe. So I think football is converging towards Eurovision in that way as well.
Does anybody know what the current World Cup rules are on product placement? Because we know from this Eurovision that product placement is very much not allowed in your Eurovision entry after Eleni Ferreira's pineapple sponsorship got knocked back.
Yet Netta was allowed to talk about Pikachu, Barbie. Just saying.
Yeah, well, I think it's all about the visual product placement rather than the verbal product placement.
I think it's pretty much not allowed because they've got like these top 8 sponsors that they can't show any competitors for. So, for example, in one of the previous tournaments, a Danish player called Nicholas Bentner, who's not playing in the first team this time, but he tried to show the Paddy Power betting logo on his underpants, and he was found to have been in contravention of something, and he was fined a massive amount of money for that. So I think it's not allowed.
It's not allowed unless it's one of the pre-agreed tournament sponsors.
Because I vaguely remember, I think there was an issue in 2006, I think it was, with the Dutch fans or something, and it was found that a company had bought a load of tickets so that they could be in a prominent place to be featured on the TV. There was some kind of weird thing like that, but
yeah, it was the beer company that gives out the orange overalls.
Yeah.
I just want to point out when you were talking about Paddy Power, so it just reminded me. They're doing interesting advertising with the World Cup because for every goal that Russia scores, they're donating 10,000, I don't know what currency it is, to gay charities. So just to go into the controversies of Russia hosting it, I literally just saw that about 5 minutes ago. I literally just saw it now. I think that's quite intriguing.
That's interesting.
Shall we talk in that way?
Shall we talk about today's match, or shall we talk about Russia, human rights, and LGBT equality first?
Today's match.
Let's talk about today's match.
I was going to go with Russia and human rights, but as long as we can do that later, that's fine.
We'll finish on that nice downer.
All right.
Okay, so today was the opening match of the World Cup. We've only got one game to talk about today, and it was Russia taking on Saudi Arabia in Group A. Now, Russia are not expected to be a great team and do great things. They are 70th in the world in the FIFA rankings. They're the lowest FIFA ranked host country ever for a World Cup, and Saudi Arabia are placed 3 places above them in the world rankings. But that's not how it turned out today. Chris?
I will say that there is the one thing. Russia would be higher in the rankings, I feel, because it's the same problem every host country has. Because you can't play in the qualifiers beforehand, you actually lose a load of FIFA ranking votes. It's another weird way that FIFA rankings are done, but they're probably like something like 30 or 40th in the world, but they just dropped down naturally. But that being said, their performances have been shocking as of late. Not today, though, but that might just be because Saudi Arabia were even more shocking. It was honestly one of the worst defending efforts I've ever seen at a World Cup, bar maybe Brazil in 2014 semi-final when everything fell apart from them then and they lost 7-1. It was 5-0 and Russia arguably should have had a couple more, bar a few particularly wasteful moments. Russia... They looked good, but they didn't look great, and they won't have their first real test until they play their next match, which I can't remember who that is against.
It's either Egypt or Uruguay.
Yeah.
Either way around, I don't hold out a lot of hope for Russia against Egypt or Uruguay.
No, certainly not. I think that maybe if they could score a point against Egypt, then if they get that draw, that might be all they need, because unless Egypt, and there is a chance that Egypt will get more goals against Saudi Arabia, let's be fair, but those 5 goals, goal difference is the first tie-break here, so that 5 goals in that game without reply could be very, very crucial for Russia. So they've set themselves up well to maybe make it out of this group.
This is another thing that is sort of exciting and special about the World Cup, for better or for worse. After you've had a season of teams of roughly the same ability playing each other, or at least within the sort of same ability bracket playing each other, you come up with the just absolutely astonishing range of football ability. All of these countries have gone through grueling qualifying processes over the course of the last 2 years, and so these are not the worst football teams in the world. There is like another 120, 150 countries that didn't qualify for this, but still, you get these just dizzying gulfs in skill. So Saudi Arabia are much, much worse than Russia. And Russia are much, much, much worse than Uruguay. And this will hopefully be reflected in the scores and also in what you see on the pitch. And I don't know, how can you tell that you're watching a game between two really reasonably good teams, or a dreadful team and a much less dreadful team, or two really good teams? How can you tell when you're watching a good game?
I'm just going to jump in. I think a really, really good way is looking at the possession stat. I think if it's fairly even, it tends to be the teams that are of a higher quality. So if you've got 2 really terrible teams, it's very much a matter of luck. Who's going to do really well and who's going to do really bad. Like today, who would have predicted 5-0? Who? If you look at I don't know what the possession stats are today, but I know that weirdly, Saudi Arabia had almost double the passes and a much higher pass success rate today.
That's because Saudi Arabia were trying to do a passing game.
This is another measure I really look at. One thing that really annoys me with football is when they are constantly passing back, like it's rugby or something. I hate it so passionately when they're too scared to go forward. And I think if you see a lot of that happening, that's a bad team. If they're not, if there's reason for it, if they're constantly passing back to their goalie, I think that's a really good measure of a bad team.
I've got a different view on passing back, and I say this because Johan Cruyff, the great Dutch striker of the 70s, who then became a great manager of Barcelona in the 90s, he was kind of like the Johnny Logan of football, if you like, in Eurovision terms. But, I mean, he used to say that, I think it was him anyway, that any time when you don't have the ball, you're expending more energy. So I think one of the great things about football is that it's whatever you want it to be. So it can be a game of attrition. It can be a game of whacking the ball as hard as you want into the other team's half and trying to get your big man on the end of it, or it can be a game of keeping the ball. And I think football, in some cases, we've seen this with Manchester City last season in the Premier League. We see it sometimes with the current Brazil side. It's been elevated to this level of almost competitive choreography, where it's not about necessarily the resources. It's about using the resources in the right way. And by the right way, I mean passing, I mean movement, I mean making it not only look entertaining for the fans, but also be effective in the end result. And I mean, I also look at Eurovision from this year, and I look at the fact that you had Sweden with Benjamin Ingrosso, with that light show, with so much professionalism that it almost put off, I think, some voters. And then you had Moldova coming up with a cardboard cut out of a cupboard and doing a fantastic job with that choreography. And football, a bit like pop music, is about using the resources in front of you to make something good.
I think that, for me, the thing with football is sometimes even the very best matches and the very best teams, you have to accept that sometimes it could be boring, because sometimes it becomes a little bit very tactical. You end up with people keeping possession, and it's not until there's a mistake where it can happen, where the other team get the ball or somebody scores. But there's the ones where you see it and you're like, they're constantly giving the ball away, they're constantly making mistakes. There's passes in the wrong places, all that. That's when you can tell, I think, when you've got a team that is maybe of a lesser quality, which I'd have to say you saw that a lot today with Saudi Arabia. They were making the passes. They were making an awful lot of passes. But then it was like they were just looking for themselves. And every time that they made a pass, there was always a chance that a Russian player about a second later was going to get it off them. They just weren't looking in the right areas, and they were getting the very basics right. And that is the thing. Like, sometimes you do get teams worse than that where they can't even get the basics right. But there was the ideas were there, all the right ideas, and they had some good players. But it's when you get those great players and you can get really exciting matches that drag on for all 90 minutes, there's that tension. And that's one of the best things. Sometimes games of football can suck you in so much that you do not lose attention for 90 minutes. And those tend to be the teams that are at the very best, where they have that drama, that passion, that level of professionality that really drives it forward.
Yeah, for me, there's two kinds of really, really good football match. There's the tense drama where it's backwards and forwards and neither side is really giving an inch, and you can see that somebody's going to score, but you don't know who's going to score, and you're basically there, fetal position, adrenaline going, sort of fists clenched against the possibility of some action breaking out, because you know that if action breaks out, it's 50% chance that it's not going to be going your way. And then the other kind of really good football match is essentially the samba party, basically, where everybody is just having a great time. Maybe you're totally demolishing a much worse side, or maybe you're just having a magical night where all the creativity is coming through you, and you've got some really charismatic players, and they're being entertaining, and networking with the crowd, and there's a lot of energy in the stadium. So yeah, it's drama and a musical. And that's what's good about football.
Yeah. No, I know, there is. I think it is all about that drama, and that is that beautiful thing that you do get wonderful scenes sometimes, and it can be either the drama from a 1-0 where somebody gets a last minute goal, or a 7-0, or there's always something new and exciting, and you don't know what you're going to get going into it. And that's, again, going back to the Eurovision comparison, I think sometimes at Eurovision we kind of go in expecting something, and then you get that shock that somebody comes out of nowhere, or they turn up with something really special, and they do a lot better than anybody predicted. And I think more or less every World Cup we've always had that kind of shock. It's very rare to get that in a league situation. The only time in the last 20 or so years where we've had that in the Premier League was Leicester, and they ended up winning the entire thing, and that was a spectacular story that I don't think will ever really be matched.
To be honest, it's the equivalent of Portugal winning Eurovision.
Portugal winning Eurovision, exactly. You end up with that wow moment where out of nowhere for the first time somebody does that. And at the World
Go, Lucy.
At the World Cup, you just get things like Ghana, like 2010 did amazingly. South Korea made the semi-finals in 2002. So there's always that little moment where somebody comes out of nowhere and does really well.
I wanted to ask you guys, because I'm a guest, and you guys are obviously doing this podcast regularly. When you look at Eurovision, I mean, people in the broadsheet newspapers were saying that this year's Eurovision was the sign of a golden age of Eurovision. I always remember particular World Cups as being a particularly great time. I think France '98 was the first time I really felt, yeah, the World Cup is the best thing in the world. It's the best thing that could possibly be. When was the first time you felt that about Eurovision? When was the first time you felt, yeah, we're in a golden age now, this is fantastic?
Kind of like, I think each decade is very, very different to each other in Eurovision. I don't know what it is, just like the 90s is totally different to the noughties, totally different to the 10s. I've watched Eurovision since I was a kid, and like, I think the first time I've been able to, my sister's very cool, very hipster and whatever, I've actually managed to persuade her to listen to Eurovision songs from 2016 onwards, and that's my measure of golden age. I think obviously there's amazing songs further back, but just for the average, maybe it's because we're in the UK, and the UK are very sceptical, but just for like the kind of music that could be played on radio, I would say, yeah, 2016 onwards in the current golden age of Eurovision. I mean, don't get me wrong, I think there's some absolute bangers kind of in the whole decade. But if I have my playlist on shuffle in the car or whatever, my sister was she was like, oh, this is actually really cool, kind of I think it was Jana Bocheska. She was like, damn, like, this is really, like, what? This is Eurovision? And Dihaj followed it straight away, and then Blanche. And she was like, she wasn't expecting it at all. I didn't even tell her it was Eurovision. She was like, this is really good music. I was like, well, kind of hater to you. This is Eurovision hater, but I think I know a lot of people love to trash 2017, but the songs that were good were so good, like so good, and I think that's my opinion on it. I think kind of in the current golden age, I mean, obviously Malmö as well, onwards is a very special one for people. Kind of the production, Baku and Dusseldorf, very much production value went up another level from that point as well.
Yeah, I mean, if you go back and listen to the albums, the Eurovision albums from the turn of the millennium, 2001 to 2003, they all sound like demo recordings. Just very thin, very empty, and just really out of step with what was in the charts at the time. But, and I'm now trying to get back to football, everybody will have a World Cup that for them was particularly personally exciting, maybe because it was their first World Cup, or it was a World Cup where the country that they feel an affinity with did really well. And other people will have found that World Cup incredibly tedious and predictable. And within the World Cup, we're going to get quite a lot of games, and there might only be a dozen of them that are, iconic, exciting fixtures. And there might be a dozen ones that are just sort of edgy 1-0s. But it's that multi-layered, sort of nested storyline of football. So there's the story that's going on within one match. There's the story of a country performing in the World Cup over a few weeks. And then there's the story built up over years of individual players and managers, and how they're all part of this sort of global footballing network now. And the story over decades of different countries' football systems sort of ebbing and flowing and growing in skill and things. And there is always a level at which something is happening in football.
I agree with you about. I think a really good thing they're doing, like kind of in regards to what you just said, is there's this, I keep on calling it the League of Nations, and that's not a thing. That's like a World War One thing. The tournament after, like instead of friendly, I can't remember what it's called.
Federation. Oh, the Nations League.
Yes.
I think that is an amazing thing because it continues this atmosphere of World Cup and layers and stuff. So it's got tiers A to D. This is just European football, and basically, long story short, it gives a wild card chance for. So A is the best, England are it, and D is the worst, and it's got teams like Gibraltar, San Marino, and and I think they're in there, and it gives them a chance to qualify for future Euro tournaments. I think one team from each gets a wild card who hasn't made it. So we could see like Ellie, we could see Scotland. I think they're in Tier C. We could see Scotland in the next Euro tournament. I mean, they could drastically improve. We don't know between now and then, but I think they're continuing it past the World Cup as well. I think that's such an amazing thing.
Any opportunity for Scotland to gloriously fail is okay with me. Right.
Yeah,
okay.
I think that there's. Oh,
Go ahead, Chris.
In terms of there's always the perennials as well. So if you don't like that kind of, there's a golden age for a particular team. There are some teams where if you just want that consistency, you can have that at the World Cup. Like you get a Brazil, who you always know are going to put on an amazing show. You get Germany, who tend to always be there. Argentina, countries like that, who you can usually be solid in saying, if you just want that consistency and you just want a nice, safe thing, which again, you see at things like Eurovision, you always know that somebody like Ukraine is going to show up with a great stage show or something like that. You're always going to have that one thing. And sometimes teams don't even change the way they play over decades, really. And that can be for better or for worse. But that's the great thing, is that you will find that team or that country for you who plays in that way that at that moment you want to follow. And you can have a one-shot wonder or you can have those decades of consistency. It's completely your choice, but you'll find somebody that offers that.
By the way, coming back to Ukraine, I'm surprised, frankly, and disappointed that no football team has adopted the Ukrainian hamster wheel as a training technique. I think that was it 2015 when they came up with the hamster wheel for their dancer. I'm convinced that that's the way for subs to warm up in the World Cup.
Right. Okay. So we've got into the weeds a little bit. Shall we talk quickly about who's not at the World Cup, and then we'll talk a bit about politics. So the Netherlands are not at the World Cup. Italy are not.
Italy are probably the big ones, I think.
Yeah.
And also, Italy had a rubbish 2014 World Cup along with England, and we were in the same group as Italy, and we had Uruguay and Costa Rica as well, and everybody was just kind of like, oh, Costa Rica, but they were used to climate, and they were good. They won the group. They beat all of these supposedly amazing teams, and Italy and England got knocked out before we didn't even go through to the knockout. So Italy then having another rubbish. They're not even in the 2018. It's not good for Italy, and it was Buffon's last international. Can't find the word, but it's his last time to try and go for World Cup, and they haven't qualified.
Yeah,
the team I'm disappointed that isn't there, and it's a bit of a left field one. New Zealand. Now they've never had a great World Cup. They had a quite good one in 2010. They drew against Italy. They went home unbeaten. But point is, in their final playoff game, because for Oceania, which is the area where New Zealand come from, their winner has to play against the bottom South American team. I think the sixth best South American team, which was Peru. And so they went to Peru for the second leg of this playoff, fairly optimistic that they might win. But they were kept up all night by musicians, which may or may not, plausible deniability, have been hired by the team to keep them awake outside their hotel. So, I mean, that kind of skullduggery happens everywhere. I'm sure it happens in Eurovision as well, but I just don't like that kind of story in football. I would have liked to have seen New Zealand go through.
And another team that lost out in those Asia playoff teams was Syria. We have Australia in the World Cup only because they beat Syria over one. How did it end up 3-2 at the end of full time?
Yeah, it was 2 legs, and I think it was 1-1 the first match. It was 1-1 in the second match, and they went to extra time, and then Australia in extra time got the goal that sent them through, which is huge shame.
That close to having Syria in the World Cup, which I think that would be a huge story.
Yeah, and that was another big story at the time because they couldn't play any of their matches in Syria, of course. And you know, this team where they don't know what's happened to their families even at home. That could have just been such an amazing politically charged thing. Obviously, I mean, you know, we've got people like America have missed out as well for the first time in decades, I think, since they've not been in. But
it was the 80s, if I remember correctly, the last time.
And that's a huge shame as well, because American football, you know, Major League Soccer, as they call it, that's really starting to take off there. You've got people like Beckham supporting it. So for them to miss out could completely damage those chances. And I'm sure that FIFA also weren't happy because all the sponsorship money you lose out from not having America.
Yeah. How can you sell the World Cup to America when America aren't into it? I suppose you can say, here's some of the stars you'll be getting in MLS in maybe 4 or 5 years.
We'd say, here's a World Cup in 2026.
I think actually you'd be surprised. I mean, America was switched off from football, but I mean, that 2014 World Cup, I think they started to notice the joy of what they call soccer. You know, that I really feel like America started to connect, which is why this non-qualification was such a disappointment for them.
So that's who's not joining us. So yeah, let's talk about the big thing. The reason why my work sweepstake for the World Cup is also collecting money for Amnesty International. There were some concerns about Russia's hosting of the World Cup, and they were multiple. We talked already about the potential for corruption within FIFA in awarding the World Cup to Russia in the first place. But then there's also the political and sort of social situation in Russia. There are specific laws against LGBT equality in Russia, and there's also a history of football-connected violence and racism in Russia. And these are some of the issues which were causing people to say, maybe we shouldn't honour our fixtures in Russia, or we shouldn't send our dignitaries to go and represent our country in Russia. But we're here. Vladimir had his 5 minutes on camera to the world before the game. What do we think?
I think for me, it's there's so many issues, and you've touched on pretty much all of them. I think that I can think of, and then there's already been specific examples of what has been going on. Egypt were training in Chechnya, where we know the atrocities that are going on against gay men in Chechnya at the moment. That was a complete PR stunt by the Chechnyans, obviously, which it really is appalling. And
the fact that FIFA weren't controlling the training camps enough, that they're allowing their players to be used as basically political props.
Mm-hmm. And there is the very much possibility of there being racist chanting. I think everybody was on their best behaviour today in that arena because it was Saudi Arabia, who are kind of an ally of Russia, I believe. It seemed that Putin and the Saudi Arabian dignitary were certainly being very pally in the box where they were watching it. And at the same time, I just worry later on in the tournament whether black players there are people of colour who play in the Russian division who get racist chanting. And if they're getting it, then people from all over the world coming, I do worry. I do really worry. The best thing that can come of this is that nothing happens. And I mean that both from the way of, no, Russia don't come out of it looking better because nothing happened, but also, we know that there's already problems, but also that nobody is attacked, or that there isn't violence, or that there isn't this. I don't think it's going to get better by the World Cup being there, because I think that opportunity has passed, and we've already seen things like the Chechnya thing happen. But I hope that in a way there is the kind of lingering thing, and maybe in the future something can change. But as long as nothing bad happens, but Russia don't come out of it looking good, that's kind of, if you can see that kind of weird middle ground I'm hoping for, that's what I'm looking at it from.
Like next year, we just want to get next year in Eurovision, we just want to get through it without incident.
Thing is, though, it's the first day of the World Cup, and there are both English and French fans who are gay. First day. I mean, I can't really comment on it because I am not health, so I don't really know how to go about saying this. But there was some people have gone and campaigning, and obviously that's going to provoke the police, whether it's right or wrong. So that's happened. But then there was a couple of I don't know loads of details. I've just seen it on Twitter. But yeah, there've been quite a few French fans arrested already today. There's been one match, so I'm not sure if the middle. Obviously, if they won, we don't know what's going to happen the rest of the tournament. But it's already, maybe it's Western media. I don't know. There's so many different angles to everything, but it's already started.
Yeah, I think one of the sad things about the World Cup is that only a few nations can afford to host it these days. It's become such a big spectacle, and there is still a lot of the world which does not have, shall I say, constructive views on gay rights, on freedom of movement, freedom of speech, freedom of press. And it's such a shame when the World Cup, which claims to be a big family that is travelling, that is bringing the language of football and of unity to the rest of the world, will go to a host nation and just allow that host nation to imprint its own prejudices on that World Cup. And I think we're seeing that a bit with Russia already, and we will see it with Qatar as well, because, I mean, anyone who thinks that Qatar is going to change and become more liberal just because of the World Cup is probably fooling themselves. I think that's a really sad thing, and it says to me that there are, I mean, I grew up in the 90s. I went to university and studied politics, and at that time there was a kind of liberal consensus that, hey, liberalism is spreading, prosperity is spreading, we're all feeling better, and we're all learning to be more like each other. And I feel like that consensus has gone now, and views are becoming more entrenched, and you're ending up with human rights disasters that are not going checked because the country has a lot of financial power. And it's such a shame that a unifying influence like the World Cup can't help that.
And what do? I suppose what we do is we keep talking about things.
We have to, and we have to try and get broadcasters and people who've been given the press passes to talk about it, because I mean, I hate to use this phrase, the mainstream media, because it makes me sound like a Trump supporter or something, but the mainstream media has been trying to airbrush Russia in the last few days, and has been trying to say, oh, it's surprisingly pleasant. Well, yes, it is, but there's a lot of things that we need to investigate and expose while we're there, as would be the case if we went to any country with the kinds of human rights issues that Russia has, that Qatar will have in 2022.
I think it's a shame we've seen with the England players where they've said, the right thing to do would be to walk off the pitch if there was racist chanting or this, and they said, but we're not going to do that because FIFA will deal with it, this, that, and the other. The problem with letting FIFA deal with it is that FIFA, I think Russia were recently fined something like €18,000 for racist chanting, and then a football player got charged 30,000 for it was quite a minor offence in relation to a section of fans, quite a big section of fans, racist chanting. So we can't leave it to FIFA. I think you're right. I think we do have to. We hope that the broadcasters, that the news, do continue to hound it and that they don't let up. This is a 30-day period, more or less, where the focus is very much on Russia. Let's keep it there, but don't just focus on the football. There should be people scratching at the surface, finding stuff out. It's going to be difficult because it's Russia, and we know what happens, and the intimidation and the methods that they use can be very extreme. So there is going to be a solution, and it should always be that dialogue, and that should be remembered that, yes, this is a celebration of football, but remember where you brought it. And I just hope that there is that kind of undercurrent whilst, I just hope that there isn't a big incident, which is why it is talked about.
I have faith in the BBC because when the Winter Olympics were held in Sochi, the Russian government made jokes about Claire Balding being gay, and she went anyway on purpose and talked about it, and it was so admirable to a next level. So for people not from England, Claire Balding, she is amazing. She's one of the most famous presenters here. And yeah, she's very, very much part of the BBC's Olympic team. And yeah, so they made comments on her, and she purposely went to Sochi, didn't appeared to not give a damn, and just talked about it openly, like, yeah, I'm still going, and if anybody says anything to me, this is what I'll do. And I mean, she doesn't really commentate on football so much. She commentates on a lot of things, but football is one of those things that it's not. So I don't think she's part of the team going to Russia for this World Cup, but it would be badass if it was, because she was amazing in 2014. I don't know what other broadcasters do.
I mean, my trust in the BBC has gone down just because Gary Lineker, who I thought was a liberal icon for a while, I mean, some of his tweets about refugees were what you would expect of a decent thinking person, but still, it was interesting to see a celebrity come out in that way. And for him then to host the World Cup draw and to also say, look, guys, we don't need to worry too much about corruption in Russia. There's corruption in lots of places. Let's just focus on the football. I mean, that whole spiel about keeping politics out of sport is something that people say when they want to hide what's really happening. And I really hope that the BBC is going to have that independent voice. I hope that Russia hasn't said, guys, if you want to broadcast, then you have to do it our way, because that would be a shame if it was so.
Yeah. So, okay, let's give everybody some homework while they're watching tomorrow's games, as well as paying attention to the football and the haircuts and the meme-worthy stuff happening in the crowd. Take a look and really try and think about how the broadcasters are presenting Russia to you. And see whether you can see where any sharp edges have been sanded away, and see whether they're really talking about the reality of being in Russia rather than being in Russia for the TV. Tomorrow's games, we have Egypt versus Uruguay, Morocco versus Iran, and Portugal versus Spain. There will be drama.
Portugal versus Spain is going to be amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Spain, of course, have fired their coach. Was it yesterday?
Yeah.
Proving that Spanish drama isn't just confined to Eurovision.
Oh yeah, and I believe it's their coach was potentially going to manage Real Madrid after Zinedine Zidane's departure, and there's rumours of it. So as soon as that all happened, in comes, I'm assuming, the head of the Spanish Football Association, comes and fires him in front of everybody in the dressing room. Supposedly, that's the rumour. So they were managerless for a few hours. It was like alarmingly quick. I think they obviously had a plan in place when they went and fired him. But having a manager-player relationship does not take 2 days unless they've done background stuff without telling anybody.
I think it's the assistant who's stepped up, but it's still not what you would call ideal. Anyway, shall we? One last word from everybody, then we'll wrap up and let people get on with it. Chris?
I'm gonna say, the match was enjoyable today. I hope that we see more matches like that where there is a lot of high scoring. We didn't see VAR. That's a whole other thing that we're gonna have to get into at some point to explain to people that don't know what VAR is. But yeah, 3 matches tomorrow. I think Egypt Uruguay will be really good. Morocco Iran could surprise us, but Portugal Spain. If you're gonna watch one, make sure you watch that one.
Mm-hmm. Lucy?
I think the match today was a really big shock, and if there's one reason you want to watch the World Cup, a high-scoring game doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt, and the World Cup is definitely a place for that. 7-1 in semi-final. No respect to that. I think you end up carrying on watching matches like, go on, do another one, why not? And it's such an exciting game, and you don't know when that's going to happen, but when it does happen, you're glued. And let's hope for more matches like that, because it was very unexpected today. I went in thinking Saudi Arabia was going to win 2-0. I really did. And let's all just really enjoy this cup, and let's all support our different. We can put flags back in our names again. This has only just occurred to me.
Yay!
I've got 3 little lions for England. But it's just get into it, because it can be absolutely thrilling, and hey, it doesn't hurt. Quick my words out. Doesn't hurt the office banter either. So
nice one, Stuart.
Yeah, I think Spain-Portugal is going to be the match that everyone watches, but I would say keep an eye out for Morocco-Iran as well, because that's the kind of match that, for me, the World Cup is all about. It's getting 2 sets of players who not a lot of people know a lot about within English football circles, and seeing what 2 teams are all about from countries that are maybe outside the mainstream for us. Also, I want to say, although we're asking for people to expose the murkier side of Russian politics, of the anti-gay laws, etc., Russia is also a country of diverse and interesting people, and I very much hope that all of the nice things about Russia come out during the World Cup while we're exposing the bad things.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so that's wrapping up the first episode of the Listen Outside Game On podcast for the World Cup 2018. I'd like to thank Chris, Lucy and Stuart for joining me. I've been Ellie, and we'll see you next time for more tangentially related football chat. Bye!
Bye!
Okay, that worked.